Picture a frigid winter night on the lawless frontier, where the wind howls across a lonely prairie, blanketed in snow. A weak cry echoes through the darkness. A young woman, barely clinging to life, collapses at the threshold of a deserted barn. Moments before, she lost her newborn twins to a cruel twist of fate, and as if that heartbreak weren't enough, her husband cast her into the raging storm, like unwanted scraps. Hope seems as distant as the stars overhead, until the steady clop of hooves breaks the silence and a mysterious, wealthy cowboy appears on the ridge. Little does she know that single act of kindness will unravel her entire world. There was nothing but the relentless wind whispering across the plains, weaving through the splintered fences and the sagging roof shingles of an isolated farmstead outside Cheyenne, Wyoming. The year was 1883, when men fought over dusty cattle trails and fortunes were gambled with the flick of a card in saloons. On this particular winter night, the snow fell in merciless drifts, burying footprints and wagon tracks alike, concealing any evidence of the tragedies that had transpired just hours before. Inside a barren bedroom, lit only by the dying glow of a lantern, Clara Hastings lay shivering on a worn straw mattress. Her body felt torn apart. Moments earlier, she had given birth to twin babies, precious lives that had come and gone almost before they'd begun. Their silence in the doctor's arms spoke volumes. Two stillborn angels. Clara's screams had cracked the farmhouse walls, and now only the hush of despair remained. Abraham Hastings. Her husband stood at the doorway. His boots, caked with mud and snow, left a trail on the fraying rug. An ominous scowl spread across his face, and though his eyes flickered with momentary pity, it vanished as swiftly as it came. Abraham's mind was already turning over the implications of losing two potential heirs, the bitterness he felt growing like poison for the woman he believed had betrayed him with a failed womb, settled firmly in his chest. Dr. Emerson, summoned in the dead of night, stood with a bowed head. Though he disliked Abraham and his harsh ways, he had done his best for Clara. But out in these remote parts, the best was sometimes not enough. He offered no final words of comfort, only a gentle sigh as he quietly packed his instruments and retreated into the storm, heading back to Cheyenne to deliver the sad news to anyone who might inquire. Abraham wasted no time. No sooner had Dr. Emerson left than he threw open the window shutters. A blast of freezing air swept into the room, and Clara's eyes fluttered open. She was weak, disoriented, her frail body exhausted from the birth and the heartbreak. She could barely speak when Abraham seized her by the arm and forced her to stand on shaky legs. "Get out!" he spat, voice trembling with a mix of rage and condemnation. "I got no use for a wife who can't bring me children. You can't carry on my name. You can't give me nothing but trouble." Clara tried to form words, but only a raspy plea came out. She clutched at her belly with her free hand, imagining she could still feel the weight of her unborn children, though she knew they were gone forever. The heartbreak was raw, like a fresh wound. She collapsed against Abraham's chest, tears freezing on her cheeks in the icy wind. But there was no mercy in him tonight. In one swift, brutal movement, Abraham dragged her outside. Snow stung Clara's eyes, and her boots slipped on the icy threshold. She barely managed to grab the doorframe, but Abraham shoved her again, sending her tumbling off the porch into a mound of snow. She lay there for a moment, the howling wind swirling flurries around her, the farmhouse's lights a dim glow in her spinning vision. She felt numb physically and emotionally. In the corners of her mind, she clung to the impossible idea that maybe her babies were still alive, that any moment someone would place them in her arms. But reality pressed down like a weight on her chest. Through the open doorway, Abraham stood with clenched fists. "Don't come back," he warned. "We're done." He slammed the door. The lock clicked final and cold. And so Clara lay in the storm, at the mercy of the bitter winter night. The cold pressed in on her lungs, and each breath felt like shards of glass slicing through her. With her last bit of strength, she tried to crawl. She had nowhere to go, no money, no family that would take her back. Her parents had long disapproved of her marriage to Abraham, but even if they had welcomed her, they lived far across the territory. She had no horse, no carriage, and no coat sturdy enough for a blizzard. She glimpsed the shape of a barn on the edge of Abraham's land. The roof sagged on one side, and the old wood let in flurries of snow, but it was a barrier against the wind, if nothing else. Inch by inch, she crept across the yard, willing her arms to push forward. Her tears froze on her cheeks, and each movement sent waves of pain through her abdomen. Behind her, the farmhouse stood silent, darkened as though it held no memory or sympathy for the suffering woman left to freeze. The wind roared, drowning out even the echo of Clara's sobs. She collapsed once inside the half-broken barn door. The dryness of hay pricked her skin, but at least it was warmer than the open air. She closed her eyes. Time lost meaning. Maybe minutes passed. Maybe hours. At some point, through her haze, she heard the soft clop of hooves. Instinct told her it might be Abraham come to finish the cruel job, or chase her farther away. But the hoofbeats were lighter, more purposeful. A low voice carried on the storm. Anyone there? Hello. Clara's eyes fluttered open, though she could barely keep them from rolling shut again. She glimpsed the outline of a tall figure silhouetted by the moonlight. He wore a wide-brimmed cowboy hat, and behind him stood a majestic black stallion. Snow draped the man's shoulders. "Ma'am," came the gentle call. She heard the scraping sound of boots dismounting, then footsteps crunching through snow. "Help," she croaked. The word tasted bitter on her chapped lips. He knelt by her side, his breath vapor in the cold. In the dim moonlight, Clara registered a pair of kind green eyes, set in a rugged face with a well-trimmed beard. He had a thick coat that looked expensive, better than anything she'd seen on typical ranchers out here. Only wealthy travelers or ranch owners could afford such attire. "Oh, Lord," he murmured. "What's happened to you?" His name was James Caldwell. She would learn that later. For now, he was simply a steadying presence in the maelstrom of her pain. With surprising tenderness, he slipped a gloved hand beneath her shoulder to lift her into a sitting position. "You're half frozen," he said in concern. "We need to get you warm." Clara managed a slight nod. Darkness threatened to close in. She thought of her lost twins, feeling her eyes well with tears that froze almost as soon as they formed. She clutched his coat lapel, as though afraid if she let go she would slip away forever. James wasted no time. He pulled a thick blanket from his saddlebag and wrapped it around Clara, then lifted her in his arms as though she weighed nothing. Through a haze, she saw the shape of the black stallion. James placed her in the saddle, holding her carefully as he climbed up behind her. The warmth of his body pressed against her back offered the first glimmer of life she'd felt since stumbling outside. "Hold on," he whispered, arms securing her. "I won't let you fall." That was all Clara needed to hear. She gave in to exhaustion, letting unconsciousness claim her, lulled by the rhythmic sway of the horse and the promise of refuge. Clara awoke in a room that smelled faintly of cedar and lamp oil. A crackling fire danced in a stone fireplace. She was lying in a proper bed, with crisp sheets and a thick quilt drawn up to her chin. For a fleeting second, she thought she might be back in her childhood home, where her parents once tucked her in on cold nights. But as she stirred, reality struck. She reached for her abdomen. The memory of the stillborn twins crashed into her like a lead weight. Her eyes welled up, and she reflexively pressed her face into the pillow. Everything felt so final, so painfully empty. The door creaked open. In walked James Caldwell, hat in hand, hair still dusted with melting snow. His presence filled the small room. "You're awake," he said. His voice was low and comforting. "How are you feeling?" Clara managed to push herself up onto her elbows. Weakness plagued her, but at least she felt warm and alive. She studied James in the lamplight, tall, broad-shouldered with the bearing of someone used to commanding a room. A faint scar traced along his jaw, giving him a roguish air. She started, then cleared her throat. "Thank you." He set his hat on the table and took a seat in a worn wooden chair beside the bed. A silver pocket watch glinted from his vest. She noted the fine material of his coat, the subtle gold ring on his finger. Definitely well off, unusually so for these parts. "You've been asleep for a day and a half," he told her. "Dr. Jacobs has been by to check on you, said you'd be fine so long as you get some rest." Her eyes flickered around the room. "Where am I, Cheyenne?" James answered. "In a boarding house run by Mrs. Petunia Green. She's a good soul, lent us this room. I paid for a few nights. Figured you'd need a safe place until you're on your feet." Clara felt a wave of gratitude and embarrassment wash over her simultaneously. I can't pay you," she said, her voice trembling. "I have no money. No means." James shook his head. "No need. Besides, it's just money, and I've got more than my fair share." She lowered her gaze, tears threatening again at the memory of being thrown out into the snow. Why had James been traveling near Abraham's farm? What had prompted him to stop? The questions whirled in her mind, but the sorrow overshadowed them. James noticed her distress. Gently he reached over to pat her hand. "You don't owe me an explanation," he said softly. "But if you need someone to listen, I'm here." Something in his kind expression broke Clara's reserve. She felt the urge to speak, to unload the horrors she had just lived through. So in halting sentences, she told him everything: her marriage to Abraham, the stillborn twins, and how she had been cast out into the storm like an unwanted stray. As the words spilled forth, tears streamed down her face. James listened intently, not once interrupting. The flickering shadows on the walls marked the passing of time, but he remained silent, letting her release her grief. When she was finished, when there were no tears left, he simply said, "I'm sorry. You deserved better." Clara sniffled and managed a nod. "I don't even know who to turn to now," she admitted. "We'll figure it out," James offered. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze. "There's a small mercantile run by an old friend of mine, Rachel Morgan, across town. She might be able to help you find work, or we can see about you traveling somewhere else if you'd prefer. But first you rest." Clara gazed at him, overwhelmed by his generosity. She couldn't fathom why this stranger, this wealthy cowboy, would go to such lengths for her. But as she sank back into the pillows, She felt for the first time in ages a flicker of hope. 2 weeks passed in the boarding house. Each day, Clara grew a bit stronger, venturing from the bed to the common room, where she found Mrs. Petunia Green knitting by the fire, or a few travelers warming themselves while passing through Cheyenne. James came by every afternoon, checking on her, and occasionally escorting her on brief walks down the snowy main street to help her regain her strength. Whispers followed them whenever they strolled together. Town gossips speculated about who the pale woman on Caldwell's arm might be. Some rumors claimed she was his secret lover. Others said she was a distant cousin. And some eyed her with disdain, assuming she must be a gold digger, seeing as James Caldwell was rumored to be one of the richest men in the Wyoming Territory, aside from railroad magnates. Clara paid the rumors little heed. She was too consumed with surviving each day. The memory of the twins still haunted her. Nightmares claimed her sleep, and she would wake gasping, her heart pounding like a drum. Each time she found herself alone in the small room. Yet in the morning, the sound of James's boots in the hall comforted her more than she cared to admit. One day, James entered the boarding house parlor, looking pensive. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Green and approached Clara, who stood gazing out the window at the drifting snow. "I've got news," he said quietly. "I ran into Dr. Emerson. He was in town to file some paperwork. We talked." He paused, a shadow crossing his features. "He confirmed what you told me about your husband. Abraham Hastings is well known for his unpleasantness. Folks have heard the story of what he did to you." Clara's lips trembled. She couldn't bear to think of Abraham. The betrayal still burned like a fresh wound. "He's not coming after me, is he?" James shook his head. "Doesn't seem likely. He's holed up at that farm, apparently in bad shape. Rumor has it he's deep in debt borrowed heavily from some unscrupulous characters in Laramie. His finances are crumbling, especially after a series of bad deals. Something about a land dispute near the Powder River." Clara closed her eyes, taking a steadying breath. She'd known Abraham had money troubles, but not to the extent. A small part of her felt a twisted satisfaction that fate was dealing him a heavy blow. Yet she also felt fear. Debt could make a man desperate and unpredictable. "Thank you for letting me know," she said softly, turning away from the window. "But I don't think he cares enough about me anymore to come after me." James placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You deserve better than a man like that. I want you to know, Clara, whatever you decide, however you want to move forward, I'm here to help." She looked up, meeting his gaze. There was sincerity in his green eyes. "You hardly know me," she said in wonder. He smiled sadly, removing his hand. "Sometimes we're drawn to help because it's the right thing to do. And if we don't do what's right out here in the West, who will?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes. His kindness was unlike anything she'd experienced. "Thank you," she whispered. Winter in Cheyenne rolled by slowly. The blizzards turned the main street into ruts of frozen mud, and shipments from out east arrived intermittently. Food was scarcer, prices higher, and tensions rose around the saloons by nightfall. Clara began to rebuild her life piece by piece. Rachel Morgan, the mercantile owner James had mentioned, took Clara on as a clerk. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Clara helped stock shelves, tally the ledger, and greet customers. She made a humble wage enough to start saving for a future on her own. For the first time in years, she had a glimpse of independence. Rachel was a stout woman in her late 30s with warm brown eyes and an easy smile. She'd once been part of a wagon train that ended in disaster near the Salt Lake region, losing her husband in a tragic accident. Now she ran the mercantile with competence and a motherly air. She sensed the grief radiating from Clara. "I won't pry," Rachel said one morning after they set out a display of new fabrics. "But I want you to know I'm here if you need someone to talk to. Some of us have endured heartbreak too big to carry alone." Clara nodded, giving her a grateful smile. Though she wasn't ready to talk about the twins or her husband with anyone but James, she appreciated Rachel's gentle offer. Over the next month, Clara settled into a routine. She moved from the boarding house to a small rented room above the mercantile, an attic space with a narrow bed and a single window overlooking the bustling street. It was not luxurious, but it was hers, free from Abraham's shadow. James, for his part, was a frequent visitor. He'd come by the store to purchase supplies for his ranch, but often lingered, chatting with Clara or offering to help with crates. He was courteous, never crossing boundaries. Still, a spark of unspoken tension flickered between them, an undercurrent of unacknowledged feelings that both excited and unnerved Clara. She was not ready for romance. Her wounds were still too fresh. But she couldn't deny the warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever James was near. Occasionally, James would share tidbits about his life. He mentioned how he'd made his fortune through careful investments in cattle drives and an early partnership in a silver mine near Nevada. He owned a sprawling ranch north of Cheyenne, employing a handful of ranch hands and stable boys. Locals referred to his ranch as the Caldwell Range, known for its prime grazing land. But James rarely boasted. He seemed to carry the weight of loneliness behind his success. One day, while Clara was sweeping the mercantile floor, James approached with an uncharacteristic nervousness. "Afternoon, Clara," he said, tipping his hat. "Rachel around?" "She's in the back, counting the new shipment of flour." Clara leaned on the broom. "What can I do for you, James?" fiddled with the brim of his hat. "I wanted to invite you to dinner tonight, just as friends," he added hastily, noticing her startled look. "There's a new place by the train depot, Miss Tilly's, that serves decent stew and fresh bread. Thought maybe we could talk, get out of this store for a bit." Clara hesitated, a swirl of emotion churning inside. Part of her worried what people would think. Another part craved a small piece of normalcy. A quiet dinner away from prying eyes and dusty aisles sounded lovely. She took a breath. "I'd like that," she said softly. His smile lit the room. "Great. I'll come by at 6. And with that, he left, tipping his hat to an amused Rachel on the way out. Clara couldn't remember the last time she'd been on anything resembling a date. Abraham had courted her once, but even that felt like a lifetime ago, and it certainly hadn't been filled with the gentle warmth James exuded. She pushed aside her trepidations and dressed in her best modest gown, a soft blue fabric that Rachel had gifted her from the store's stock. She braided her hair, pinned it up, and tried to calm her fluttering nerves. James arrived promptly at 6, wearing a clean waistcoat and polished boots. He offered his arm, and she took it. As they walked, the winter sky burned in shades of crimson and gold, setting a backdrop for the small city's evening bustle. Saloons buzzed with laughter and music, while lamplights flickered along the wooden sidewalks. Miss Tilly's was a charming establishment, all polished wood and checkered tablecloths. The savory aroma of stew and pies filled the air. James led Clara to a corner table by a window away from the main crowd, and they settled in. He ordered hearty beef stew, cornbread, and hot tea for them both. As they sipped their tea, Clara found herself laughing at James's story of how he'd gotten lost on a cattle drive near Fort Laramie. He described the fiasco involving a broken compass, a runaway horse, and a quick-witted ranch hand named Travis Johnson, who saved them from being caught in a flash flood. Clara smiled, enjoying his animated storytelling. For a moment she forgot her sorrow. Then, just as their meal was served, a familiar figure approached their table. Clara's heart seized. It was Dr. Emerson, the same doctor who had delivered her twins and declared them stillborn on that terrible night. He wore a grave expression. "Good evening, Miss Hastings," Dr. Emerson said softly. He acknowledged James with a respectful nod. "Mr. Caldwell." James stood politely greeting the doctor. Clara felt her pulse quicken. Why was Dr. Emerson here? Had something happened? "Pardon my intrusion," Dr. Emerson continued. "But I had a matter of some importance to discuss. It concerns your twins, Clara." Her breath caught in her throat. My twins?" James glanced between them, sensing the tension. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" Doctor." Emerson jerked his head toward the hallway that led to Miss Tilly's back office, a small space occasionally used for storing extra supplies. Clara rose on shaky legs, and James guided her gently. Inside the office, Dr. Emerson shut the door, expression somber. "There's no easy way to say this," he began. "After you passed out that night, I had to attend to matters quickly. When I examined the twins, I believed them stillborn. But in my rush, I might have missed. There was the faintest glimmer of life in one of them." Clara's heart lurched. James placed a reassuring hand on her arm, but she couldn't speak. She felt tears sting her eyes, confusion and hope swirling within her. Dr. Emerson continued. "By the time I realized it, you'd been thrown out, and I was frightened for your safety. I tried to find you afterward, but you'd already gone." The baby boy showed a slight heartbeat. "I was able to revive him barely. He was in critical condition. I didn't know what else to do, so I handed him over to a nurse. I trust Lucy Marsh, who runs a small infirmary on the outskirts of Cheyenne. She's been caring for the child these past weeks." Clara let out a choked sob. "My son is alive." Her mind reeled, heart pounding so loud she could hardly think. "But..." And the other. "My daughter," Dr. Emerson bowed his head. "Your daughter did not survive, Clara. I'm truly sorry." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. She wasn't sure whether to feel joy or devastation. One child gone forever. One child miraculously clinging to life. James squeezed her shoulder. "Where is he now?" he asked, voice strained. "In the infirmary still," Dr. Emerson replied. "He's weak, but he's survived thus far. I was going to tell you sooner, but I only just discovered your whereabouts, and Lucy Marsh insisted we wait until the child's condition stabilized." He hesitated. "Abraham Hastings. He doesn't know." A flash of protectiveness rushed through Clara. She never wanted Abraham to lay eyes on her son, not after what he'd done. Her hands trembled, and James rubbed her back gently. Dr. Emerson bowed his head. "I'm sorry for the pain my oversight caused. If you wish, we can go see him tomorrow." Clara nodded, breath shuddering. Yes, please." They left the office in a daze, ignoring curious stares from patrons in Miss Tilly's. The night felt surreal, lit by flickering lanterns. Clara clung to James, her emotions a tangled mess, grief for her daughter, a fierce, desperate love for her son, and anger that she'd been left in ignorance. The next morning, James rented a small buggy. He and Clara drove out in silence to the outskirts of town. Snowdrifts lined the rutted road, and the wind carried a biting chill, but the bright winter sun pierced patches of clouds, shedding hopeful rays on the frosted ground. They arrived at a modest building with a wooden sign that read, Marsh Infirmary. A narrow path, recently shoveled, led up to the entrance. Clara was trembling as she dismounted, anxiety tightening her chest. Inside, the warmth of a wood-burning stove greeted them. Lucy Marsh, a middle-aged nurse with a warm smile and gentle grey eyes, rose to meet them. "Miss Hastings," she said softly. "Come this way." Lucy led them to a small room where a handful of cots lined the walls. The place smelled of antiseptic, but it was clean and well kept. In the furthest corner, a swaddled bundle rested. Lucy guided Clara toward it, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Clara's heart thundered. She peered down at the infant's face, tears blurring her vision. He was so small, tiny pink cheeks, wisps of dark hair, just like hers, and eyes closed in slumber. She reached a trembling hand to gently brush his cheek, feeling the soft warmth of his skin. "He's been doing better these past few days," Lucy explained. "He's a fighter, that one. We've been feeding him with a special formula since you weren't here. But he's strong." Clara's tears spilled over, and she sank onto a stool beside the cot, gazing at her son, her miracle child. Guilt and gratitude warred within her. She regretted every second she hadn't been by his side, had believed him gone. But she also thanked God he had survived. James stood behind her, silent, his expression reflecting both awe and fierce protectiveness. He laid a hand on Clara's shoulder. She looked up at him, tears glistening on her cheeks, and offered a shaky smile. "How can I ever repay you?" Clara whispered to Lucy. "You saved my son." Lucy knelt beside her, shaking her head. "No repayment needed. I do this because it's right. That's all the reward I need." She smiled gently. "You can stay with him as long as you like. He needs his mother." Over the following days, Clara practically lived at the infirmary, learning how to feed, bathe, and care for her son. Lucy showed her the ropes, and soon enough Clara found a new purpose in life. Though sorrow for her lost daughter lingered like a permanent ache, the presence of her son, she named him Samuel, kindled an overwhelming love that made each day feel like a gift. James visited daily, bringing fresh linens, warm clothes for the baby, and hot meals for Clara. He made no demands, asked for nothing in return. Instead, he watched quietly as mother and child bonded. A sense of family began to form, a new kind of family, forged from tragedy and kindness. One afternoon, after Lucy had stepped out, James and Clara sat by the infant's cot, marveling at Samuel's delicate features. Clara smiled as he cooed softly. "I never imagined I'd have this chance," she murmured. James gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You do now, and I'll help any way I can." Their eyes locked. An unspoken emotion passed between them, fragile, yet profound. Clara felt her heart thud. She still carried a deep wariness, memories of Abraham's cruelty weighed on her. But here was James, standing by her side, offering unwavering support. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." He squeezed her hand, and they fell into a comfortable silence, the soft crackle of the fireplace enveloping them. As word spread around Cheyenne about Clara's miracle baby, It was only a matter of time before news reached the wrong ears. On a particularly cold morning, while Clara and James were at the mercantile discussing baby supplies with Rachel, a rider approached, breathlessly calling for James Caldwell. James excused himself, stepping out onto the snowy porch with Clara by his side. The rider, a young ranch hand from Caldwell Range, tugged on his hat in deference. "Mr. Caldwell," the man gasped, clouds of steam billowing from his mouth. "Bad news. Abraham Hastings has come around looking for Miss Hastings. He's claiming she stole his child. He's stirring up trouble, says he'll come to Cheyenne and settle matters himself." Fear rippled through Clara. She clutched James's arm, and he steadied her. Rachel, who had followed them outside, frowned deeply. "That man's trouble," she muttered. "Everyone in these parts knows it." James exhaled slowly. "Did Hastings say anything about the baby?" The ranch hand nodded grimly. "Yes, sir. He claims that if Miss Hastings is raising some child, it must be his rightful heir. He wants it back. Says he's owed something after all he's lost." Clara's stomach twisted with dread. She could hardly believe Abraham would want the baby, given how he'd cast her aside. But perhaps he saw the child as a last hope, or simply as property. Maybe he thought a son could secure him a financial future or help in forging alliances. Either way, the thought of him taking Samuel sent Clara's heart into a tailspin. James turned to Clara, voice firm yet gentle. "We'll keep you both safe." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I can't let him have Samuel," she whispered fiercely. "I won't." "That's right," James said. "You won't." The ranch hand glanced nervously between them. "Hastings might arrive in town any day now. Folks say he's traveled to Laramie for hired guns or something along those lines." James's jaw tightened. "He's that desperate." "Huh?" "It seems so, Mr. Caldwell." James nodded. "Good work, Billy. Head back to the ranch. Tell the men to stay alert. I'll be out there soon." The rider tipped his hat and galloped away. Clara stood on the mercantile porch, snow swirling around her skirts. She could barely stand from the tremors of fear. James touched her shoulder gently, guiding her inside. Rachel locked the door behind them, turning the sign to closed. Clara sank into a chair by the counter, feeling tears threaten. "He can't take my baby," she said, breath trembling. "I'd die first." James knelt beside her, holding her hands. "He won't, I promise. We'll figure this out. Wyoming law might be on our side, but it's shaky out here in frontier territory. We need a better plan." Rachel frowned thoughtfully. "Have you considered leaving Cheyenne at least for a while?" Clara's mind reeled. Part of her hated the thought of running. She had finally started forging a life here, found a semblance of stability. But fear for Samuel's safety overshadowed all else. "Where would I go?" she asked, voice cracking. A contemplative look crossed James's face. "My ranch," he said quietly. "It's well guarded far enough from the main road. Abraham would have a harder time causing trouble there." Clara hesitated. The idea of living under James's roof, spending days in his private home, made her heart flutter with both anxiety and a strange warmth. Could she trust that he truly had no ulterior motives? Yet every action he'd taken so far proved his genuine kindness. Rachel nodded. "That might be wise. If Hastings is raising trouble, the best place for you to be is somewhere with armed hands loyal to Caldwell." Clara looked at James, searching his eyes for any hint of doubt. She found none. Only resolve. She took a shaky breath. "All right," she said quietly. "I'll go." That evening, James loaded a wagon with the few belongings Clara had amassed, along with supplies from the mercantile. He helped her bundle Samuel in warm blankets, tucking him safely in a makeshift cradle. They set out at dusk, traveling away from Cheyenne, under a sky ablaze with stars. The journey took them north through rolling grasslands, now frosted with snow. Clara dozed on and off, lulled by the wagon's sway. She was exhausted, both from the new demands of caring for Samuel and from the stress of anticipating Abraham's next move. They arrived at Caldwell Range close to midnight. Lanterns glowed in the windows of a sprawling wooden ranch house. It was larger than Clara expected, a testament to James's wealth and influence. A wraparound porch encircled the structure, and beyond it, outbuildings loomed in the moonlight, stables, a bunkhouse, storehouses. A small cluster of lights flickered from the bunkhouse, where ranch hands likely stirred in the late hour to welcome their boss. James helped Clara down from the wagon, carefully cradling Samuel in one arm. 2 ranch hands. Travis Johnson, the same man from James's earlier story, and a lanky youth named Robbie, greeted them with salutes of "Welcome home, boss." "This is Miss Hastings," James introduced. "She's under my protection. Show her every courtesy." Travis gave a friendly nod. "Ma'am, welcome. We'll keep an eye out for any trouble." Robbie took the wagon to the stable. Travis grabbed Clara's trunk. James led her inside. The house was warm, a fire crackling in the grand stone fireplace of the main hall. The interior was surprisingly refined for a frontier ranch, a wide staircase leading to the second-floor walls, decorated with paintings of western landscapes and plush rugs from far-off looms. James directed Clara to a cozy bedroom on the ground floor, down a short corridor. A large bed, with a carved wooden frame, dominated the room. Soft lamplight revealed a small cradle set near the fireplace. "I asked Travis to bring this cradle down from the attic," James said, gently placing Samuel inside, bundling him snugly. Clara hovered, tears brimming, overwhelmed by the generosity. "Thank you for all of this." He offered a faint smile. "You're safe here, Clara. Make yourself at home." He bid her good night, heading to check on ranch matters before turning in. Clara sat by the cradle, watching Samuel's tiny chest rise and fall. The flickering firelight illuminated his delicate features. She felt a surge of fierce love. This was her child, her reason to keep going. A new chapter of her life had begun. Days turned into weeks at Caldwell Range. Clara settled into a routine, caring for Samuel, helping the ranch hands by preparing meals or mending clothes, feeling more useful and at ease. The ranch bustled with activity cattle to feed fences, to repair supplies, to restock, and James oversaw it all with measured authority. Despite his wealth, he worked alongside his men, never shirking the physical labor. Clara found comfort in the ranch's daily rhythms. The vast plains surrounding them offered an odd sense of freedom, an escape from her troubled past. She even helped with small chores in the stables, learning how to groom James's black stallion named Midnight. She discovered that time spent with animals soothed her lingering anxiety. Still, the question of Abraham loomed. Every so often, James or Travis would venture into Cheyenne for supplies and come back with rumors. Some said Abraham had indeed traveled to Laramie, gathering a small band of unsavory men, likely hired guns. Others claimed they had been spotted near the outskirts of Cheyenne. Tension coiled in Clara's gut. James tightened security around the ranch, posting lookouts and ensuring that the bunkhouse was well stocked with rifles. He hated the idea of violence, but he wouldn't let any harm come to Clara or Samuel. One frosty morning, as Clara was outside hanging laundry, she noticed a dark plume of dust in the distance, riders approaching. Her heart kicked. She called for James, and he emerged from the barn, eyes narrowing beneath his Stetson hat. Travis James shouted, "We've got visitors!" Travis and 2 other ranch hands hurried to the main yard, rifles in hand. The group of riders halted some 50 yards away, the lead figure lifting a hand in greeting. Even from the distance, Clara recognized Abraham's imposing stance. Ice trickled down her spine. Abraham trotted forward a bit more, flanked by 3 men with sinister glints in their eyes. One carried a double-barreled shotgun, another had a revolver strapped low on his hip. The third, with pock-marked cheeks, sneered in Travis's direction. James stepped out front, posture calm but alert. Travis and the others stood just behind him. Clara hovered near the porch steps, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Hastings," James called, voice echoing across the snowy yard. "What brings you here?" Abraham's upper lip curled in a cruel smile. "I've come for my wife and my son. Didn't realize a man needed more reason than that." Clara stiffened. Hearing Abraham call her his wife felt like a punch to the gut. James folded his arms over his chest. "She's not going anywhere with you, Hastings. You threw her out, left her for dead, and you've got no claim on that boy." Abraham's eyes gleamed. "She's my wife by law, Caldwell. That child's mine by blood. Hand them over, and we won't have to make this ugly." He patted the holster at his hip in a not-so-subtle threat. "I'm prepared to enforce my rights." Clara's heart thundered. She stepped down off the porch, summoning courage she didn't know she had. "You have no rights over me or my son," she called, voice trembling but resolute. "You left us to die." Abraham's face hardened with fury. "You dare speak to me like that?" He glared at James. "I see she's become your whore now. Figures you'd take advantage of a vulnerable woman. But that child is mine." James's eyes flashed. "Watch your mouth, Hastings. I suggest you ride out of here." One of Abraham's hired men spat on the ground. Tension crackled in the air, thick enough to choke on. Travis and the ranch hands shifted rifles at the ready. Abraham let out a mirthless laugh. "I'm not leaving without my property," Abraham growled, scowling at Clara. "If you want to keep your precious ranch intact, Caldwell, you'll hand her over, or we can shoot it out." James took a step forward, fists clenched. "Don't be a fool, Hastings. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and the law might not be strong out here, but we got enough folks who'd stand by us if this turned bloody. Don't do something you'll regret. A standoff." Neither side budged. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. She feared for James, for the ranch hands, for herself, and Samuel. Then abruptly, Abraham signaled his men to lower their weapons. His voice dropped cold and menacing. "Then we'll do this another way. You can't keep her locked up forever. One day, she'll slip up, and I'll have my child." With that, Abraham wheeled his horse around the hired guns, following suit. They kicked up a swirl of snow and dust as they galloped away, leaving Clara trembling. James turned his face grim. She searched his eyes, seeking reassurance. He opened his arms and she fell into them, tears of fear trailing down her cheeks. "We'll protect you," he murmured, cradling her against his chest. "I promise." After Abraham's visit, James tightened security even further. He hired additional men, reliable folks he knew from past cattle drives and business ventures, paying them handsomely to patrol the ranch perimeter. Travis and Robbie worked in shifts, each taking nights to stand guard with rifles near the house. Clara's nerves were perpetually on edge. She barely slept, often waking at the slightest sound, heart pounding. She worried about stray bullets or midnight raids. The ranch hands assured her they were well equipped to handle trouble, but a gnawing dread remained. Abraham was cunning, and desperation fueled dangerous men. In the midst of this tense waiting, a letter arrived for James, carried by a stagecoach from Denver. The letter bore the name of a lawyer, Marshall and Gray. Clara watched James read it, his eyebrows furrowing. "What is it?" she asked softly, Samuel dozing in her arms. James exhaled, folding the parchment. "I contacted an attorney friend in Denver, asking about the legality of your situation. Since you were forcibly abandoned and left for dead, you have grounds to claim you were never truly in a sustainable marriage contract." Clara's brow knitted. "Is that recognized out here?" He shrugged, expression cautious. "The West is wild, but a Denver court might look at it favorably. It'll be a lengthy process, but Marshall and Gray believe we can secure an annulment, or at least a divorce, that doesn't cede custody to Abraham. However," he trailed off. "However," she pressed. James hesitated. "We'd need you to travel to Denver to file papers in person. That's risky right now, with Abraham on the prowl, but it might be the only way to sever his legal claim. If we succeed, you'd be free, and he'd have no right to the child." Clara's heart pounded with renewed hope. Could she truly be free from Abraham's grasp? The possibility felt like a lifeline, but traveling to Denver, exposing herself on the open roads, seemed terrifying. She looked down at Samuel's sleeping face. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said firmly, "as long as it means keeping him safe." James nodded. "Then we'll plan carefully. We'll need to gather some men we trust, travel in a group. We can't let Hastings intercept us." A week later, under the guise of a cattle drive, James and Clara prepared to depart. Travis, Robbie, and 3 other ranch hands formed a protective escort. The plan was to take a long, winding route to Denver, avoiding the main trails where Abraham might set an ambush. They set out before dawn, rolling wagons filled with goods, for trade part cover story, part actual cargo. Clara and Samuel rode in a covered wagon shielded from prying eyes. James rode ahead with Travis to scout the path. The journey was arduous. Winter's grip still held turning roads to slush and ice. They camped beneath starlit skies, huddling around campfires for warmth. Clara struggled to keep Samuel comfortable, but the baby proved resilient, soothed by her gentle lullabies. James would often take turns holding him, his paternal side, shining through in every smile and soft word. They pressed onward day after day. Sometimes they glimpsed suspicious riders on distant hills, prompting them to detour. Other times they paid local innkeepers a few extra coins for discreet lodging, all while scanning for any sign of Abraham's men. Still, dread lingered like a dark shadow. Abraham was cunning. They couldn't let their guard down, not for a moment. 3 days' ride from Denver, the group found themselves traversing a lonely stretch of plains, the wind biting at their faces. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent hues of orange and red. That's when Travis, scouting ahead, reined his horse around and raced back, alarm etched on his face. "Riders," he shouted as he approached. "Looks like Hastings and 6 men are trailing us from the south." James swore under his breath. He rode up alongside the covered wagon. "Clara, get down. Keep Samuel safe. We'll try to outrun them or find cover." But the land around them was mostly flat, with a few gentle rises and scattered scrub. Not the best place for a defensive stand. The wagon lurched as the horses broke into a faster gait, guided by Robbie. James, Travis, and the other riders formed a rear guard, guns at the ready. Hoofbeats thundered behind them. Clara peeked out the wagon flap, adrenaline surging. In the distance, she saw Abraham at the lead, fury twisting his face. Gunshots cracked through the air. Bullets whistled, spooking the horses. Clara ducked low, shielding Samuel with her body. James and his men returned fire. A savage chase ensued. Clouds of dust rose, swirling into the frigid twilight. Clara clung to the wagon bench, praying for a miracle. Suddenly the wagon hit a rut in the ground, jolting violently. Robbie fought to keep control, but the wheels skittered and the wagon threatened to tip. Another shot rang out, grazing one horse's flank, causing it to rear. Clara's heart lurched. If the wagon overturned, it could crush them. James roared an order. "Stop! Form a line." The ranch hands pulled up, turning to face Abraham's posse head-on. The wagon slowed, and Clara clutched Samuel to her chest, peering out with terrified eyes. A final standoff, reminiscent of the one at Caldwell Range, but more deadly, was about to unfold. Abraham reined his horse in his men, spreading out in a semicircle. Guns glinted in the dying light. "End of the line. Caldwell." Abraham's sneered voice carrying on the wind. "Hand over my wife and son, and maybe I won't kill every last one of you." James's men, grim-faced, fanned out. Travis cocked his rifle, aiming it steadily. "Over my dead body," he growled. Abraham laughed, cruel and hollow. "That can be arranged." The standoff erupted in gunfire. Clara crouched inside the wagon, shielding Samuel as bullets tore through the dusk. James and his men held their ground, fending off Abraham and his hired guns. 2 of Abraham's men fell quickly. The others scattered or wounded. Abraham charged forward, determined to reach the wagon. James intercepted him. Their horses clashed Abraham, firing wildly. James dodged and returned fire, grazing Abraham's shoulder and knocking him from the saddle. James dismounted, gun still drawn, and pinned Abraham to the ground. Around them the chaos subsided. Abraham's men either fled or were captured. Clara emerged trembling. She looked at the man who had nearly destroyed her life, now broken and bleeding. "You've already paid," she said softly. "You threw everything away." Abraham's hatred was palpable, but he had no strength left to fight. Travis bound him, and James promised, "You'll stand trial. Your threats end here." Clara clutched Samuel, tears slipping down her cheeks, not from fear, but from relief. The nightmare was over. Abraham was finished. The group limped into a small frontier town en route to Denver, battered from the ambush. Their first stop, the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wyatt Earp, known across the West, took one look at the bound, wounded Abraham Hastings and locked him up without hesitation. "You did right bringing him in alive," Earp said firmly. Clara exhaled, the heavy fear lifting at last. In Denver, James took Clara to the law firm of Marshall and Gray. Backed by witness accounts and Dr. Emerson's statement, the lawyers filed for divorce, citing abandonment and attempted murder. They were confident Clara would win full custody of Samuel. As legal proceedings began, James and Clara stayed at a quiet inn. The city, bustling and full of life, offered Clara a glimpse of the world beyond her pain. She strolled the tree-lined park with Samuel. the boy giggling at falling leaves, her heart swelling with joy. The past still haunted her, but with Abraham behind bars and a new future within reach, Clara began to feel something unfamiliar. Peace. Days before returning to Caldwell Range, Clara and James sat in the quiet parlor of their Denver inn. A fire crackled nearby, and baby Samuel slept peacefully in his bassinet. James handed Clara a cup of tea, their silence filled with tension and something unspoken. Clara glanced at him, heart full. "I can't ever repay you," she began, "for saving me, for everything." James shook his head gently. "You owe me nothing. I did what was right." Clara placed her hand over his. "You gave me hope again. And I feel something for you, James. Something I didn't think I'd ever feel." James's voice was low. "I've felt it too, from the first night I saw you in the snow. But I didn't want to push." Her eyes welled with emotion. "I'm still healing. But if you'll have me, I'd like to try. With you." He smiled softly, pulling her into a warm embrace. They stayed close, hearts beating in quiet harmony. When Samuel stirred, Clara rose to soothe him, glancing back at James with hope blooming in her gaze. A new life was beginning, not born of fear, but of love. 3 months later, Abraham Hastings was convicted of attempted murder and other charges in a Denver court, his name disgraced in the territory. Clara's divorce was granted, and she was awarded sole custody of Samuel. News traveled back to Cheyenne, and folks who had once whispered behind Clara's back now applauded her courage. Clara chose to stay on at Caldwell Range, forging a deeper bond with James as they raised Samuel together. She found purpose in ranch life, blossoming in her role and discovering strength she never knew she possessed. Over time, Clara and James decided to marry, this time for love instead of obligation. In a quiet ceremony, surrounded by ranch hands and a few close friends, they exchanged vows under a blazing Wyoming sunset. Samuel giggled in Lucy Marsh's arms. The nurse who had saved him as the newlyweds sealed their union with a gentle kiss. Life remained a challenge on the rough frontier, but hope thrived amid the hardships. Clara often stood on the ranch porch in the evenings, watching the horizon, where the sky met the plains, holding Samuel in her arms. She would think of her lost daughter, a sorrowful memory forever etched into her heart, and send a silent prayer heavenward. Then James would join her, slipping an arm around her waist, grounding her in the present. Though her journey was forged in tragedy and betrayal, it led her to a destiny she never expected, a second chance at love. A family bound by genuine devotion and the promise that even in the harshest storms, kindness could guide one home. In the end, Clara's story shows us that no matter how dark the storm, hope can still shine through if we dare to believe in second chances. She lost her daughter, but gained a miracle son, abandoned by a cruel husband, but rescued by a compassionate cowboy who risked everything to protect her. Their trials on the frontier teach us about resilience, love, and the power of humanity when faced with impossible odds. Now Clara and James stand side by side on Caldwell Range, living proof that even the harshest tragedies can give rise to beautiful new beginnings. Thank you for listening to this gripping tale of heartbreak, courage, and redemption. If you found yourself invested in Clara's journey and the rough and tumble world of the Wild West, please remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps keep these stories alive and our community growing. Stay tuned for more adventures, and we'll see you in the next tale.